Today we have Tiah Goldstein. We had a very nice chat when she was under the rain, and we were discussing about sustainability and helping startups building a new way of business models, so you guys can build your businesses with a social impact and make sure that your business lasts longer. I know that Tiah is the founder of Interwoven HQ and has over 25 years of international experience in developing interactive and practical programs, frameworks, and strategies around entrepreneurship, sustainability, scaling social impact, and leadership. And to me, Tiah has a lot more background, and I will let her to share her background with you even better than myself. But what really excites me about Tiah, she has natural sense of humor and passion about what she does. She's a very interactive, a very interesting person, and I'm sure she will deliver a very exciting presentation today. And I will be helping her in her talk or Telegram. Please like our live stream, repost, comment. It helps us to be found on social media or be recommended. So this is how more entrepreneurs can benefit out of it. So that's it on my end. Tiah, hi, how are you?
And hello. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much, Daniel, for the opportunity. What you didn't see, one of the things that I think is always fascinating is what you don't see in the background of me running around trying to steal different screens in order to be able to figure out the technologies. So, hi, my name is Tiah from Interwoven HQ. I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes taking apart my brain and sharing with you some thoughts and perspectives about impact and about what I do and how I interact with the world. So before I start, I'd actually just really like to thank Go Global and the team for opportunity to present to you. I'd like to say happy Ramadan to anybody who is celebrating Ramadan at the moment. I'm currently in Israel, and it's very interesting to learn more about Ramadan. And I'd also really like to say that I feel like we are in a very privileged position. The current situation of COVID, I'm not sure if anybody has been aware what's been happening in India. There's a massive crisis happening in India around COVID, and it's highlighting a lot of the things that I hope to be touching on today, and why I feel so strongly about the imperative of using your business and yourself and your time towards making the world a better place. I think that it's quite a privilege to be speaking about these things, but it's also the most important thing. So let's see what happens while we unpack some of the thoughts that I have. So today, what I'm going to attempt to take you on a journey. We're here to talk about a pathway to impact and how the current events are providing really most interesting opportunities for growth. A lot of it is about your mindset. I think that more and more people are looking for better ways to align themselves, their businesses, and their startups, or whatever they do, their life path towards making a difference in the world or making a difference in the universe. So we're gonna explore some of the fundamental views, some of the perspectives, and some of the learnings that I've had over the time that I've been working on this, which has been quite a while. My intent today is to cover 3 spheres. I hope we'll get to all 3, which is individual, business, and community, or your environment. I want to talk about the current and emerging landscape within the context of business. And I want to potentially, hopefully, also talk about some practical tools and frameworks that you can incorporate. So first, I know that the first thing that I need to do is establish credibility. I mean, the fact that Daniel has been very kind and provided me with this amazing platform to connect, and I highly recommend that you do become a member of Go Global. It's so nice to be able to see how COVID has provided us with the opportunity to actually connect with a whole bunch of different people from around the world. So my name is Tiah. As I've said, my core belief that I operate on is the fact that businesses and entrepreneurs have the potential to change the world. So for the past 23 years, I've been exploring and implementing knowledge, tools, and frameworks around that. I've had the privilege of working across different sectors. So I've worked with community, with government, with business, and most recently and most intensely with the tech startup world. And I've lived and operated in a whole bunch of different countries, in Canada, in Australia, in Israel, in Africa, in Korea. And for the past 11 years, I've been living in Australia. And for the past 5.5 specifically, I've been working in the Queensland startup ecosystem. And recently, 3 months ago, I moved back to Israel to be closer to my family. In terms of, excuse me, what I currently do, I do a lot of different things. Anybody who knows me knows that I have many fingers in many pies. My current constellation of what I'm doing is this company called Interwoven HQ. Interwoven is all about interweaving your impact. So I help you find what your pathway to impact actually is. So I've divided into 3 different areas. One is education design. So a lot of entrepreneurial education right now within universities, within accelerator programs, within different types of anyone that is really involved with entrepreneurial education. What they're trying to do is they're trying to incorporate more impact into entrepreneurial thinking on a social enterprise. So a lot of what I do is around curriculum design. I help incorporate and infuse sustainable development goals into the frameworks of what they are doing. I also have an online program called Pathway to Impact, which helps you figure out how to how to better align your goals, identify your goals, and create action with them. And I also do a lot of strategy and research. So one of my favorite things to do is for people to ask me a question, and I go off and investigate, and I create strategies and help them implement the specific strategies around change or around impact, scaling social impact. I think that in general, that's what I do, but who am I? I think that one of the things that I often get told is that I am human. So I think I'm a very curious human. I like to operate in the world with an open heart. And that means that I like to be able to understand and explore what are my emotions, how do I interact with the world, what does it mean? I think that I have strong beliefs that I like to try and hold them in a loose way. I heard that a couple of years ago from a close friend of mine, and I adopted that because I think that it's a clever thing to say. I'm very curious. I like one of my favorite things to do is to find out new information and to find out how can we learn something new. Congruency is something that is extremely important to me, and I really work a lot towards that. And congruency is being able to align my values, my thoughts, my actions to be able to have more of an impact with what I do. I definitely operate from a very, very fundamental belief that everything is interconnected. So anything that I do, my thoughts create my actions, create my values, so on and so forth. I'm actually really curious as to why you're here and what are you seeking to find. I have many things to share, but I would love to be able to hear what are some of the things that you are interested in learning. So if you could just type in the chat in one word, either something you want to learn, something you'd like to share, and also if you have, what is an impact that you're interested in making. So I'll wait for you guys to do that. Structure. Awesome. Structure as in the types of structures of businesses, I'm assuming. We'll get to that. Anyone else?
Yeah, guys, don't be shy. Please type your thoughts here in the chat so we can make it more interactive for you. Ecology,
research. Dimitri, can you explain what you mean by ecology? Ecology as in what is the ecology we are operating in? Research as in, climate change. Okay, yeah, awesome. Transition to greener energy sources. Sustainability. Fantastic. Mental health in the direction of anxiety. Ooh, that's a really good one. Eco-anxiety is one of the top mental health issues that World Health Organization has identified as going to be the next crisis. So that's an interesting one.
I think while the guys are typing, I think many people don't really understand what sustainability is, and if you uncover it in future, so it's maybe.
That's a classic question. All right, augmenting corporate culture to be more impactful. Thanks, Jace. That's a great question. Okay, so I'm going to hope to cover all of those. And hopefully by the end of them, you'll have a clear understanding of what sustainability means from my perspective. What are some of the specific actions that you can do? How does it impact corporate culture? What are some of the things that you can do within corporate culture? So let's start and see what happens. I really think that one of the most important things is to figure out what impact you want to be able to make in the world. If you think about one of the fundamentals that I believe in, and I think that that's also something that is interesting to kind of discover, like let's set the scenes, like what are the fundamental beliefs that I hold? And these are fundamental for me. Some of them some you might agree with and some you might not agree with. I definitely believe that time is an infinite resource. A finite resource. It is not an infinite resource. It is something that I think about a lot. How am I spending my time? I only have a certain amount of time left on this universe. What am I doing in order to be able to figure out how to spend my time in the most effective way? What is my responsibility? I do believe I have a fundamental belief that I have a personal responsibility to work on making my world a better place. And you can define what that is and how you think about that in whatever way you want. I definitely believe in the first law of thermodynamics, which basically in my world means that there is no a way. So a lot of the times I think that what we do is we think, well, I'm just going to throw this away. And we forget that we actually live in a closed loop system. So if we understand that we live in a closed loop system, potentially that might change the way that we interact with the world and how we design things. I definitely think that your perspective determines your reality, and your reality changes with the observer, which is a little bit of quantum physics there. And Schrodinger's cat, whether he died in the box or not died in the box. I think that being able to understand how you are interacting with your world is something that is worthwhile also investigating. And as I said before, everything is connected. These are things that I fundamentally believe in, and they shape everything that I do and how I investigate the world around me. So when we think about these images, I think that the world has it's been a heck of a couple of years. I mean, last year, this time I was going back, I was here, but no, I was in Australia at this time after being in Israel for 2 months, and Australia had experienced some of the worst bushfires ever. There was COVID-19 had just started. We are suffocating our earth with plastics. We are doing atrocious things to other sentient beings that we share the planet with. There's still modern slavery existing today. And I think that all of these different things that are evolving is just getting to a certain tipping point. And I think that, it kind of depends on your perspective. I think that a lot of us are kind of like, well, this is okay. I'm just going to ostrich and ignore this specific situation. So another thing that I'm kind of curious about is how do you feel like on a scale from 1 is the world is going to a complete hell in a handbasket, which means nothing is going to change, to I have hope towards the future, which would be a 5. If you could just put in the chat box, what do you feel in terms of your level of hopelessness versus hope? I'm going to say that for me, it changes on a day-to-day basis. So 6, 4, 4, awesome. 5, ooh, that's pretty high, Daniel. That's good. 6 is high too. 4, thanks, Carmen. I think that checking in with yourself and understanding what you feel your locus of control is, and being able to understand how you are approaching. I definitely wake up in the morning, and a lot of times I'm like, nah, there's no point in doing anything because it's past the time to do something. But then I meet someone and I have a conversation and I feel a little bit more excited about the future. So that's kind of interesting to understand where people are at. That's very good to see that the majority of you are in the optimist rather than the world is going to hell in a handbasket. See, I already feel better. So let's start with the notion that everything is connected. So the first sphere that I want to start with is the sphere of ourselves. I'm a big believer that your internal operating system is something that you start off with when you are dealing with, excuse me, when you're dealing with business. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of times in the world that we exist, when we talk about startups and when we talk about business, it seems to be this entity that is outside of us, when in reality, this entity is actually us. We are the ones who are creating it. So therefore, understanding who we are, how we operate, and what influences the way they operate is extremely important. So what is the language that you're using? What are the thoughts that you have? What are the beliefs that you have, that you hold? And how is that excuse me, influencing your action? When we think about the internal operating system, these are some of the things that influence you. You have your consumption in terms of what you're reading in the media. You have your values, your mindset, your beliefs, your ethics. The language that you use actually is a very clear indication of where you are at. That's something simple such as I'm going to do that versus I should do that is a clear indication of where you are at in terms of your thought and your belief. And also, excuse me, often we see things, we like to think that we see things as they are, but really we see things as we are. So therefore, understanding what our internal belief system is and our internal operating system will help us become more congruent and understand how we can be more effective with how we are acting in the world. One of the things that I think is really interesting is to kind of understand how you actually look at the world. What is your starting point in the world? I've been doing sustainability. I was talking to my sister, one of my sisters the other day, and I realized that I've been thinking and doing this since 2005, which is, which is a very long time. And one of the courses that had probably the most impact on me was actually this amazing course in environmental literature. And it talked about the differences in creation myths. Now, I'm using that word deliberately. There is a wide spectrum of what people believe. I mean, I live right now in a country where 3 of the major faiths of the world originated: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And each one of those have a different creation story. So the creation story that you believe in or that you start from has a very clear way of shaping the way that you look at the world. So there are 4 different ways to look at the world. There's ecocentric, there's anthrocentric, there's industrial centricism, and technocentricism. I can't say those very well. And in a very simple way, ecocentric is nature is first, anthrocentric is anthropocentric is humans are first, industrial-centricism is thinking that the earth is basically there for us to be able to use and commodify as humans, and technocentric is that technology is going to solve all of our specific environmental issues. A simpler way to look at this is really to kind of see yourself, whether you see yourself as part of the system or whether you see yourself as separate from the system. And I really believe that this view is where a lot of the different issues and a lot of the different challenges that we are currently in have stemmed from. So if you think about the creation stories of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, the majority of all 3 of them have this idea that humans are outside of the system, that humans are here to take care of the natural environment, which the language and the way that we interact with that shifts the way that we potentially think about how we would view something specific. Versus Indigenous Australians, for example, or a lot of different Eastern philosophies very much believe that you are a part of the ecosystem, and this shifts and changes the way that you interact with certain things. Your perception is definitely going to determine your behavior. So being able to identify, okay, for a second here, let's take a look at which one am I? Do I believe that I am a part of the system, or do I believe that I am outside of the system? And that is going to determine the way that you interact with the world and how you operate your business. Okay, so we are here to talk about business, but like I said, we can't talk about business without understanding who you are as an individual and how your values and how you look at the world and how you act are going to interact with that specific thing that you are creating. So if we think about the notion that time is the most important resource, it is a finite resource. Yes, a finite resource. It's ending. How are you spending your time? And how can you use your business as a tool for change? So when we take a look at that and we take a look at the different trends that are happening in terms of the individual, there seems to be more of a change towards the we are no longer separate from, but we are a part of. And you can see that those trends are happening in terms of the different consumer trends that are happening in the market and the way that we interact. So there's an increase in consumers that are demanding more ethical behavior from companies. There's a difference in the number of people that are volunteering or that are wanting to do something that is better aligned with what they do and with the jobs that they do and how they interact with the world. And there's also been a shift in how we give and what we actually do with our finances. Now, I'm really looking forward to see some of the research that is going to come out after COVID, or a year in from COVID, around there's a lot of circumstantial evidence around the fact that people are shifting and changing their jobs because they're no longer tied to the specific employment place, and they had the opportunity to work from home, which in itself had many, many challenges and many positive aspects. A lot of people that I have spoken to and that I've heard, again, very circumstantial, are shifting and moving more towards being specific about what they want to do. And I think that's a very interesting trend, because what that does is it kind of helps to figure out, okay, if I understand what my values are, I understand how I look at the world, I understand that there are changes that are happening, then the way we view things is the way we're going to design things, right? So let's talk about the business and how business can be used as a tool for change. So I just out of curiosity, how many of you are in the world of startups, and how many of you are in the world of corporate? So if you're in startup, maybe write 1, and if you're in corporate, maybe write 2. Just to kind of get an idea of how that's of what the split is. 1 is startup, 2 Daryl is 111. I don't know if that means that he's across many startups. Still in 2? Awesome.
Yeah, okay. I guess he runs multiple companies, like
yeah, exactly. I have 3 startups. Awesome. Okay, so just to wrap up the individual aspect of things, being able to understand what world lens you come from, what are your beliefs, will help you also figure out how you can use your business as a tool for change, and what are the ways that you can use either a startup that you were just starting up or a company that you already are working in, and how can you shift that more towards change. So I'm just briefly going to talk about startups. And startup, just for those of you that are not aware, startups are also, the game of startup is to become a unicorn. And for those of you that are not aware what a unicorn is a company that has been evaluated at $1 billion. There are very few unicorns, and that is the myth of the startup culture, is to be able to get to unicorn status. So examples of companies that have gotten to unicorn status are Canva, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, Atlassian, Airbnb, Facebook. All of those were considered Zebra. Yes, thank you, Darren. That's awesome, Daryl. That's exactly right. So unicorns are something that is very prevalent. It's a very prevalent notion in the startup scene, and it's very interesting to see how this is slowly shifting and where it's shifting to. So for those of you that are also not aware of what's the difference between a startup and a business, I think that there's also a lot of confusion around that. A startup is both a stage in terms of I am starting my business, but it's an organization that is specifically formed to seek for a repeatable and scalable business model. That's Steve Blank's definition. And when we think about the startups, there's a lot of halo around how startups are going to shape and shift and change and solve a lot of the really big problems that we have in the world. Entrepreneurs are the new heroes. Innovation is a good thing. And being able to create unicorns is something that we all supposedly want to do. I don't necessarily think that, I think that what's happening in startup world, which like I said, I've been involved with for over 6 years, has been fascinating to kind of see. So just to talk a little bit about where startups live They live in an ecosystem. Unicorns live in an ecosystem, and yeah, exactly. I'm going to talk about zebras in a second, Daryl. Thank you for that. So startup ecosystems, startups don't come out of, out of a rainbow like unicorns do. There are a whole bunch of different organizations that help support this, that are part of this ecosystem. So one of them is education, and that is with universities and with different types of support organizations around startups, such as incubators and accelerator programs. And these are the ones that are doing some really interesting shifts around the way that they are incorporating impact into what they are doing. There are big companies which are suddenly having more interest in being able to use the innovation and use nonprofits as a way to be able to complete their their ESG, or their corporate social responsibility. We have funding organizations, which are government, and venture capital, which is also shifting. Service providers, it's interesting to see how consumers and innovation, where that's coming from, and how the supporting organizations are also shifting the way that they think. And research organizations, which are also increasing in the way that they are looking at what social enterprise is and how social impact works, and zebras, and being able to create something that is a little different. So just to tie that together, if I think about who I am, what I believe, and I want to be able to create a business that is going to be able to create change, or I have a business that I want to be able to shift towards change, being able to understand, first of all, where I interact and how I interact with the world, and how to shift that on a minor scale, which will impact a larger scale, is something to think about when we're thinking about startups and about this whole ecosystem in general. So just some of the shifts that are happening in the unicorn world, which I think is really interesting. And this is from a 2017 paper that I saw from this amazing organization called the Happy Startup Organization. And I think that this is a really clear picture that has happened, that is already transitioned. So we have from opportunity to what is your need. And that means in terms of you want to be able to spot an opportunity, but first of all, what is the opportunity from a business perspective, but also focus on what do you need to be able to bring into the world, and what problem do you want to actually be able to solve. The thing that I find the most interesting, which is where I'm shifting my focus to, is how we fund these specific types of innovation. So right now, there's a massive gap that is happening between the traditional methods of funding within the startup ecosystem, which are usually around venture capital. And venture capital are looking for something specific around 10xing, and we are shifting from that towards different types of finance. Social finance is on the rise. So, and other things I think is really being able to understand the difference between competition and collaboration. How can we create things how can we shift our mindset in order to be able to look at the landscape and identify what are some of the opportunities and some of the needs that we can solve by using business as a specific tool. Money is definitely the area that I have been beginning to look a lot more in. I operate based on something that is called a personal theory of change, which is what is the time that I have left in the world? What is something that is extremely important for me to be able to influence? And what is the mechanism for me to be able to do that in the most effective way that is going to shift the needle? So for a long time, I've been doing things around entrepreneurial education and around being able to create a better ecosystem to support entrepreneurs and businesses to make a shift towards making a difference in the world. And now I feel that I've done enough of that, and I want to be able to figure out how can I influence the flow of money in a different way. So the investment sources are changing, which I think is really, really fascinating. And that's from, if we look at individuals that are shifting the way that they're living, suddenly what's happening is that in Australia, there are self-managed super funds, and a lot of different people are trying to figure out how can I take my retirement funds and use them towards something that is positive. So impact investing or social finance is a massively growing area that is influencing not only startups, but also influencing the way that businesses operate as well. Decentralized finance, I think, is one of these things that is kind of like in the shadows right now. but I have no doubt is going to emerge as one of the new fandangled ways to be able to influence change. And decentralized finance is basically blockchain and Bitcoin and all of the cryptocurrencies that are happening around that. And there is a growing movement of people who are wanting to break away from the traditional ways of financing, and they are continuously seeking for different ways to be able to do that. And this is one of the ways that this can happen. So when you are thinking about your startup, when you're thinking about your business, being able to understand, again, who you are, how you operate, and what are some of the external environments that are happening that are putting pressure or changing the way that you are interacting is something that is good to remember. As I said, everything is interconnected. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the world's biggest opportunities. So I think that one of the areas that I've been involved in for the past probably about 3-4 years is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Does anybody know what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are? Just a thumbs up if you do know, and if you don't, just to kind of understand where the definitely yes, awesome. Yes, okay, great. Awesome. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, I like to think of the Sustainable Development Goals kind of similar to, I always use this example of the United Federation of Planets, for those of you that are Star Trek fans. And it's being able to create a common vision that creates a more sustainable, equitable, and peaceful world for all. Now, if you look at where we are at right now, that doesn't really exist. For example, the vaccines, whether you want to take a vaccine or not, is a perfect example of how the gap between the vaccine rollout for the have-nots and the haves is creating that gap and not working towards a more equitable and peaceful world. So the Sustainable Development Goals, are 17 of them. And each one of them outlines some specific goals that we want to be able to do in order to be able to accomplish a better world. Now, in the past, generally speaking, when you were talking about impact, or when you talked about what kind of good you wanted to do in the world, a lot of times that would be involved with that's separate from what I am actually doing, and that's nice, you're a nonprofit. And I think that there is this really interesting shift around being able to use your business as a tool and being able to capture some of the opportunities that exist within the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm just going to talk about that very briefly and talk about some of the trends that are happening as a result that are directly linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. So one of the main things that I think is fascinating is to kind of see what are entrepreneurs really good at? Entrepreneurs are good at solving problems, identifying a gap, and coming up with some kind of innovative solution to be able to solve that specific problem. So modern slavery is one of those issues that is being highlighted right now as one of the trends that is happening, one of the mega trends that is happening. So if you think about modern slavery exists. It exists. There's definitions around what modern slavery are. A lot of the supply chain actually relies on modern slavery, and modern slavery can be anything from how many of you have a phone, and the different things that are used to be able to create that phone come a lot of times from places from global south countries that use child labor to be able to extract those from the earth. So what's happening in Australia, for example, is that there's legislation, one of the strongest legislations in the world, around modern slavery, which basically means that a company that earns over a certain amount of money has to provide a report around what their supply chain is doing and how they are helping clean up the supply chain. Now, that in itself creates a plethora of opportunities for people that are looking to solve something worth solving with your time that you have very little of, that you can understand how a different perspective of I am part of rather than I am external to, creating a business that will impact that will make more sense. The other thing is plastic and waste. We are drowning in plastic. and being able to figure out different ways of creating that as a resource instead of, and if it's a closed loop system, then how can I create something from the notion of waste equals food? And if we think about our perception determines the way that we design things, if I see this as a closed loop system and I understand that I am a part of this and it is impacting everything that I do, then the way that I will design a business will be in a way in which it will create, you can call it circular economy, which is very popular these days. But just being able to think about what are some of the opportunities that exist within this massive wicked problem. Food waste is another issue. There is a massive amount of food waste, which is contributing directly to our carbon footprint. I am definitely guilty of this as well. We have chickens. My parents have chickens, but there are some things that you can't give to the chickens. And being able to figure out what are some of the technologies that you can use, or what are the different solutions that you can create in order to be able to prevent or deal with the food waste is also an interesting area. These are just really some like top of the tongue type, tip of the iceberg in terms of the different areas that you can start to think about in terms of being able to create a difference with your business. And that can be with your startup, with you creating a new business, or it can also be specifically with the business that you already operate within. So other trends that are happening that I think are really interesting is the aspect of mental health, which someone mentioned earlier. And that's also an interesting opportunity to try and work through. All of these are specific wicked problems, which I'll talk about in a second. Diversity, one of the most important, I think it's one of the most important things. If you think about the future, and the future is being, a lot of the future is being thought about in terms of artificial intelligence and who creates those artificial intelligence, and making sure that there's diversity within those who are creating our future is extremely important. There's really interesting shifts towards more of industry cross-pollination, which goes back to the being able to look at collaboration versus competition, and the rise of consumer awareness, which I think that the majority of us are very much aware of. And it's interesting to kind of see how can you capture that and how can you capture value with that. But also, what is your definition of value, which is a different conversation. So wicked problems, which for those of you that are not aware, the majority of the issues that we are currently dealing with are wicked problems. And wicked problems are problems that do not have a very specific, that don't have a definitive solution. They are problems that are created by a very large different amount of specific factors, and they influence a lot of different stakeholders. Climate change is a wicked problem. Food waste is a wicked problem. Modern slavery is a wicked problem. All of the different elements within the 17 goals are all wicked problems. So when you think about wicked problems, one of the things that you want to think about when you are thinking about what do I want to solve, which again goes back to how do I view the world, what impact do I want to make, how am I interacting, what is my style of leadership? Do you want to solve the root problem, or do you want to create an adaptation to be able to solve that? I used to be very clear on the fact that I think that you need to solve the root of the problem. I am less militant about that perspective. I do think that as long as you are orienting yourself towards impact, that is what is extremely important to think about, and whether I would be better to be able to solve the root problem, but that's sometimes extremely complicated. Another perspective is Buckminster Fuller. For those of you that are not aware of who he is, I think that it's definitely worthwhile researching him and finding out some of the things that he's done. He thinks about design, and he really thinks that, there's two scholars of thought in terms of business. You can't really change things by fighting existing reality. You have to build a new model. And I think that that's kind of what's happening within the startup world and within the business world right now, is that new models are emerging, and being able to figure out how we cross over and how we create that new reality is a delicate work that we need to be strong within ourselves to be able to understand how to navigate and how to do. when we're talking about business models, generally speaking, around using your business as a tool for change, there are 5 different models around social impact. But generally speaking, it's either a redistribution impact or embedded impact. And a redistribution impact basically means that you are creating a surplus of some kind that is being used towards social good. That's usually what the corporate social responsibility is. Or you are embedding impact, which is the new wave of entrepreneurship. I think that being able to understand the continuum of the definition of business models is something that is very important. When I was doing my MBA, originally I was doing a thesis on the barriers to the development of social entrepreneurship in Queensland. And one of the first issues that I had was being able to define what social enterprise is, similar to trying to define what sustainability is. There are a lot of different business models that are involved, and I don't really care what the definition is anymore. I think that it's important to be able to understand what your definition is and to be able to understand what pathway you want to be able to take with that. Whether you are all the way on one side, which is a traditional charity, or whether you are a traditional business, being able to understand that you have a pathway to be able to make a difference is important, no matter where you are on the spectrum. Identifying that is something that is extremely important, because it will help you figure out what is the best way for me to be able to embed this within whatever it is that I am doing. Another thing that's kind of interesting is to kind of look at the Sustainable Development Goals. If you're trying to figure out what is something that I want to be able to focus on, whether it's with what problem do I want to solve, or what do I want to use within my organization in order to be able to focus my CSR or my ESG. I love this diagram of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because it really takes them into understanding that there's the biosphere, the society, and the economy. They are all interconnected, but being able to focus on one or the other and being able to understand what is the external environment in which they're operating in will help you figure out how you can better pinpoint what actions you want to take as a business, as well as an individual. So one of the things that, are there any questions, by the way, till now?
Yeah, I suggest they have questions once you finish. And guys, please type your questions in Q&A section, or raise your hand if you want to ask questions.
Feel free to to debate me on anything. I'm always keen to hear someone saying, no, anything you're saying is complete bullshit. So that would be good, because then I can learn something different. So one of the things that I think that we as humans do is we ostrich, which is actually, I'm just going to go over here. In ostriching, I love this word. I remember a long time ago, my mom is my mom, who is a wonderful person. She likes to ostrich, so she likes to avoid thinking about specific things, and that's a very human thing. And she used to say to me, "Don't be like an ostrich in the sand." And I remember when I first was in Africa, I lived in Africa for 3.5 years, and I remember the first time I saw an ostrich, I'm like, and this is pre-internet, I called my mom. I'm like, "Mom, ostriches do not put their heads in the sand." That was a big revelation for me. But I love the idea of ostriching, because basically it's a cognitive bias that describes our human avoidance to be able to think about uncomfortable things. And I think that this is where we get stuck, right? Because as humans, if I want to operate in the world from a place of open-heartedness, it's a little bit difficult to do when I'm continuously faced with wicked problems. A perfect example of this is in Israel, when you stop at a junction at a traffic light, there are a lot of times either kids or women who are knocking on your window trying to sell you something. Now I see that and my heart just goes like, holy crap, I don't know what to do. I don't want to ignore this person, because that hardens my heart. And then I become like not the type of person that I want to be. I want to be able to change this somehow. I want to be able to influence this somehow. But being able to pick the thread of where this is such a complicated and complex issue. It has to do with the Palestinian-Israeli issue problem. It has to do with political economics. It has to do with education. It's a very complicated issue. So being able to say, it's the same thing as homelessness. When you see someone who's homeless down the street, are you going to give them money, or are you going to give them food, or are you going to ignore them? What is the action that you are going to take? And often it is much easier for us to just ostrich rather than to be able to actually take some kind of action. And I think that happens, that's where a lot of the pain happens in terms of being able to, the disconnect happens in terms of, okay, I'm a person who I believe that I am good. I believe that I want to make a difference in the world, but I have no freaking clue where to start from. Whether it's with your startup or whether it's with your business, it can be insurmountable, some of the things that we think or that we're trying to solve. Let me just see if I can go back. To the power of the krill. How do I go back here? Wait. Yay! I figured it out. So I think about krill. I think about systems a lot. I'm a big systems thinker. And krill, for those of you that don't know, krill are these little tiny things in the ocean. And what happens with krill is that krill, when they get together, they have the power to change tides and to influence the oceans in such a massive way that it's incredible. And I mean, there's a whole science around this, which is called emergent science. There's some fascinating podcasts and fascinating information around how small things can make very large change. And I think when we're thinking about theories of change, which is something that I think a lot about, a lot of times we think, well, how can I make a difference in something so big? And whether that's I want to be able to start a better environmental, social, an ESG initiative within my company, or whether I want to be able to do something with my startup, or whether I want to do something in my own life. And one of the things that the program that I specifically developed is about this, is about being able to understand that you have to start small. You have to act small and grow tall. Right? So you start off with something that is very, very small, and you influence one specific aspect of that system in order for you to be able to understand what type of change you want to be able to influence, how you want to be able to influence that, and what are the different systems that is going to specifically impact, which negates ostriching. So instead of ostriching, we want to be able to take small steps towards something that is better. So when I think, so the first sphere was the individual, the second sphere was business, which was a little random, but I hope that made sense. And then the third, which I think is extremely important, is the environment that you occupy. I think a lot about the environment that I occupy. I try and design my environment as much as possible. At the moment, it is definitely a challenge for me being able to be in the optimal environment because of my desire to be very close to my family. But I think that being able to understand and bring awareness to what is your current environment versus what is your desired environment. And what I mean by environment, again, being in a place of massive gratitude for the fact that I even have the opportunity to make these decisions and to even be in a place where I can think about these decisions. But you can do this with anywhere that you are at, because a lot of this has to do with your mindset and how you view the world. So what is my current environment, both from a physical and from a mental, from a spiritual perspective, from all the different aspects that you need as a human, and how can I change that? What are the things that I need in order for me to be able to operate at the most optimal, And I understand that different people are in different stages of their lives. Both of my sisters, for example, right now have young children, and that is consuming a lot of their time, which is amazing, and also prevents them, or not, that's not the correct word. It puts them in a specific place where being able to think about the larger concepts of how I can influence is lower on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because they're very busy being amazing parents to children that are going to grow up to be amazing individuals and amazing humans. Also thinking about what you consume, and I don't mean what you consume only from a food perspective, but also in terms of social media. fake news and social media, I remember one of the things that I have done in the past is I've designed courses for university, and I had the amazing opportunity of designing some courses for the University of Queensland in Australia. And when we were talking about where people get their news source, a lot of the people said, a lot of the students who are between the ages of 25 to 40 said that they got their news from Facebook. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? you get your news from Facebook, which has an algorithm that specifically designs to create a world for you that is just going to continue supporting the beliefs and the thoughts that you already have, and doesn't expand the way that you look at the world. No, being able to understand what you look at and how you consume things from a mental perspective, from an emotional perspective, from an intellectual perspective, be selective with what you're doing, and be selective to be able to understand that there is a plethora of different perspectives out there, and your world lens and your worldview is not necessarily the only one. I like being able to look at news from a whole bunch of different elements in order for me to be able to have a better understanding of the world itself. I highly, highly recommend an amazing organization called Future Crunch in Australia, and they have this newsletter that's all about good news to consume, and it's really, really cool. They're just an amazing bunch in general. I also think that it's important for you to think about who's around you. What are the five people that you spend the most amount of time with are the people that are going to influence you the most. And a lot of the times we can either come from a place of abundance or from a place of scarcity. And I play with that all the time, depending on how I am feeling physically and emotionally. If there is someone who is further along the journey than I am, if I am in a place of scarcity, then I will be envious of that person, and I feel that I can't get there. But if I am in a place of abundance and in a place of being able to understand that I can evolve, then I want that person around me, because they're gonna show me how to move forward in my journey. So really being able to understand who's around you and design that as much as you can, and being able to understand what is within your sphere of influence and your sphere of control. That's something that I think a lot about when I am in situations that are uncomfortable to me or that are new. What can I control in order for me to work on my mindset and bring myself to a place of stillness and a place of strength that I can operate in a much better way in the world, both as an individual as well as from a business owner perspective, and to be able to influence and share my perspective on the world with a whole bunch of other people. I think that in terms of some of the actions that I think that you can do, which I think are like tangible actions, first of all, just realign yourself. I think that there's nothing better than actually checking in with yourself and figuring out, what do I actually believe in, and what is something that I feel is extremely important, and what are some of the things that I can do in order to be able to move closer to what I believe in and the change that I want to be able to make in the world. Running experiments is something that I've been doing for a while now, and that comes from the aspect of lean startup, which is all about being able to come up with a hypothesis, a potential solution, run an experiment for a specific amount of time, and come back and see whether that was effective or not. Instead of thinking about change has to be completely something that is going to happen within a small period of time, and if it doesn't happen, that sucks. Being able to understand that, well, is this going to work? Is this tool going to work? Maybe this is going to work. I don't know if that's going to work. Being clear on what you want, what the outcome that you want to get from anything that you do around impact is extremely important. I already talked about being able to start small and grow tall. You got to aim for good and not perfect. And one of the key things from anybody that I have spoken to that uses their business as a tool for impact is that you are continuously on a learning continuum. They will start from one place, and then they're like, oh, wait, but over here and over here, and then there's this that I can learn. And there's constantly more for you to be able to improve and to increase your ability to be able to make a difference, whether it's with yourself and with your actions, or whether you're using your business as a tool for that. Different tools that I think that are extremely important to think about and to really start acquiring. If you haven't understood, if you do not know what systems thinking is, then that is one of the key things that I teach, and one of the key things that I think is important to be able to understand how to make a difference, because it encourages you to think about the system itself and where you operate and what are some of the stakeholders that are involved, and how can you take a different perspective in order for you to be able to potentially come up with a different solution. Adaptability quotient is something that a lot of people are talking about these days, and that has to do with your resilience and your ability to be able to adapt to the continuously shifting tides. And when we think about the future of work, and I was very honored to be a part of the the World Hackathon Day from Oracle, where I provided some content around Goal 8, which is around sustainable economic development. We talked a lot about what is the future of work and what are some of the skills that you need in order for you to be able to succeed as a startup or as an individual in the workforce. And a lot of that has to do with being able to be resilient, to be able to figure out how do you think in a different way that is going to be adaptable to the environment that you are in. Lean startup, I think, is one of the most fundamental things that you can also think about. And that has to do with being able to run experiments and to create prototypes before you come up with the final thing. Understanding that you are in a continuously learning environment, and how can I shape and adapt to and be open to getting feedback from all the different elements that are around me is something that is very key. And there's also, of course, there's human-centered design, which I think is a misnomer, because I actually think I like the notion of bee-centered design, which is when we think about human-centered design, again, we are putting ourselves in the center of the design of whatever we are doing. And how can we think about design in a way where we understand that we are part of the ecosystem rather than separate to the ecosystem itself. That is all I have to say for now. Thank you very much. That was a lot of talking, and I hope that it made sense and that it provided you with some insight. I'd love for you to connect with me if you're interested. You can go to my website, which is Interwoven HQ, or you can email me at hi@interwovenhq.com. And of course, I'm pretty easy to find on social media, which is on LinkedIn, mainly on LinkedIn and Twitter sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic talk. I really appreciate this. That is also a cool ending. Yeah.
Unicorns, zebras. I should have put in a zebra.
Yeah. We have a question from Yelena Golikova. What is AQ tools? Could you tell more about it?
Yeah. So I mean, AQ is it's not my area of expertise, AQ, but I definitely, like, just in terms of some of the things that you can look at in terms of AQ, one of them would be being able to understand how can I become more resilient and how can I become more flexible with my thinking. And a lot of that, in my opinion, actually comes from looking at the first sphere, which is, okay, understanding, like, making the unconscious conscious. So how am I looking at the world? What are some of the views that I have? And what am I holding on to very, very strongly? And what is it that I can potentially see how I can ask a more beautiful question? A lot of times when I'm trying to solve something, if I can only come up with two options, then I don't think that I'm not asking the right question. I need to have at least three different options in order for me to be able to move forward with a potential solution. Also, in terms of adaptability quotient, the things around being able to think like an entrepreneur and being able to understand how to do problem solving or opportunity capture is something. I think that anything that has to do with understanding how to view your interpersonal skills is something to work on. Future Crunch does some amazing work around adaptability quotient, which I highly recommend to take a look at some of the things that they're doing. Sorry. I wish I had an answer that was like this, but no. Any other questions?
Guys, please ask your questions here in the Q&A section. We have a comment from Nikita Dedik about zero pollution. They even say zero pollution, but pollution elsewhere, which is indeed true. But small steps take us closer to greener transportation anyways. That's a comment, not a question.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of this ignorance, people tend to hide from real problems. But you know what I faced with, people don't really want to actually get into it. They not even hide or ignore they are living in a different environments. Like, why would I actually separate trash, for example? Why would I don't know, use this kind of thing instead of, I mean, it's the current environment is what they used to, and why would they change? Why they put this, I don't know, effort if they don't really understand the value for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a common question that I get from people is like, well, I'm vegetarian and I'm veganish. I'm pretty much working on becoming as vegan as possible, and that has to do not only with ethical reasons but also with environmental reasons. Having a plant-based diet has been proven over and over again that is one of the key things that you can do in order to be able to make a difference in terms of carbon emissions. And I think I think that it's really interesting why people don't do things. But I think that one of the reasons is because it's not present in our lives, right? So we live in this idea that that not everything is connected. So the narrative that happens is the way that we shop, the way that we consume things is a way that allows us to continue with that very wrong narrative. So if we go to the supermarket, we don't actually see what actually happens with something that we are consuming, because we just throw it in the trash can and we can't see. It's not visual for us to be able to see the actual end of life of that. I think that this is where I think that personal work is extremely important, because being able to, instead of focusing on why are people not, being able to understand, if you have some kind of notion of like, okay, find something that you do care about, that is nudging you, that is like, okay, I actually feel something about that, and find your way into that, which means being able to identify what are some of my values, what are some of my beliefs, and what is the way that I want to influence that. And you have to start with something that is very small, whether it's, I did this amazing exercise with some of the students that I had at University of Queensland. And this is what the basis of the course that I developed was I wanted them to choose to identify one of the values that they had, identify their values, identify one of the values that they cared most about, and align it to a sustainable development goal. And then they had to create an experiment for 10 days to be able to change something, to be able to change people's behavior. And everybody chose a different approach to how they were going to do that. So, for example, some of my students, they chose to encourage people to take cold showers for 10 days. And one student came at it from the perspective of mental health, and another student came at it from the perspective of responsible energy. So those are two very different approaches, and the way that they talked about it was two different things. But I think that we often, the approach that I take in life is around appreciative inquiry, is about loving what is rather than focusing on what is not. So being able to start with where you are and follow your passion and follow your energy is going to help you figure out the next step and the next step and the next step. So if you and if you're feeling helpless, then identifying, okay, I'm feeling helpless. Great. What is one small step that I can do about that? Whether it's even just being able to understand more about the environment that is creating that specific issue. I have a lot of impotent rage that I deal with when I wander around sometimes. I wander around in like the most beautiful areas in Israel, and they're filled with trash. And I can't deal with it. Like, it's just, it fills me with so much anger, because I know it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Can you not understand that this has a complete impact around everything that you're doing? And, the only thing that I can do is control the way that I interact with that, and control the attitude that I have, and continue to focus on what impact I want to be able to make.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, it's a personal inner drivers, but also I think there are external drivers that has to be from the governments, I guess. They
100%.
They have to drive this, especially educational part, because people don't really get, and businesses especially, they focus on their bottom line, the revenue they get. But why would they care about this? Large organization, they have this CSR in place, but in terms of helping people or like making a good impact, like they need to understand why, and this why is a difficult thing. Usually, even ethics is not being taught in many universities around the world.
I disagree with that. I think that or I choose to look at this in a different way. So I think that part of the reason why you and I are even having this conversation is because you know that within your community, there is an interest for people to be able to figure out how can they use their business as a tool for change. And I think that change does not just suddenly emerge a perfect unicorn, right? Like there are a whole bunch of different forces that need to happen in order for that to be able to become a reality. And so there's legislation, there's education, there's community effort. There is, there's awareness. There's definitely economic drivers that need to be able to change. But it reaches a tipping point where suddenly something shifts. So, I think that if a perfect example of that is COVID-19 and the massive impact that has had on us globally, both from a positive perspective as well as a negative perspective. There's an awareness that is suddenly coming to the surface around the fact that, well, actually, this is no longer sustainable. So when I talk about your pathway to impact, I think it's really important to understand what area do I feel I will have the most influence on, right? So do I feel like I will have influence? If I feel like legislation is something that is extremely important, what is the way that I can potentially focus on being able to improve legislation? If I feel like education is, then what are the ways that I can feel that I can do education? And again, thinking about the small and thinking about running experiments to see, was this successful? Was it not successful? Being able to identify my specific values and the way that I am going to be able to influence change is a very worthwhile investment of time, and is what is going to bring more awareness to the things of where we need to change and how we change. Think about gay rights. That has been like a tip. That has been or Black Lives Matter movement. Like those are fights that have been going on for a very, very long time that have reached various tipping points. And you can just look at the different patterns of the different specific influences of time and events that have happened that shape that and move that forward.
Yeah, actually a great point. And in here, I wanted to say that, it's very convenient to wait for someone to do a change and help you with education and everything else, which is important, of course, but the change starts with yourself. And it's the first place, I guess, where we can impact and make a change.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Nikita. How would you encourage employees to think more of the positive impact of what they are doing or building? Nikita, can you speak a little bit more specifically around that? Is there something? Can you unmute yourself and see if we can work through it together? That's pretty broad.
Yeah, I can give the. And Dmitry Hanin also wants to ask a question. Yeah, Nikita, please turn on your camera and microphone. I'll let you speak. Just a second. So
hello. Yeah.
Can you turn on your camera, please, if you may?
The camera. I don't see the camera here, I'm afraid. I'll just leave the comment in 1 second. I'll elaborate in the comments section in the chat.
Oh, you can speak. We can hear you.
Okay. I have some background noise here. So
that's okay.
Developers, for instance, they are mostly focused on achieving certain particular results, like building software. They don't really, from my experience, they don't really think beyond what is their main job. And yeah, I'm thinking of how we should approach this, how we should see the idea of bringing some positive impact into what they're building, apart from just the technical part of it.
Yeah, right.
That makes sense.
I think so. Are you asking from a perspective of an employee, or are you asking from a perspective
as a founder,
of an employee?
As
a founder, right? Okay, yeah. Cool. So I think that that actually goes back to the issue around yourself and how you interact with the world and what is your leadership style, right? So if you're using your business as a tool for change, then that has an impact on the culture of your business, the type of people that you want to be able to bring into your business, being able to figure out what your mission and your vision and values are within the organization, and how can that permeate throughout the whole organization itself. And I think that it is potentially dangerous to assume assumptions are are dangerous in general. And I think that being able to provide opportunities for people to be able to engage, you will be surprised at how they engage. Now, opening it up, a mentor of mine, Bruce, from many years ago, he taught me the term of menu of opportunity. So, and there's been a lot of research around if you provide people with too much opportunity and too much freedom, they actually don't know what to do. So you actually have to provide them with a menu of opportunity. So for yourself as a founder, being able to understand, what do I actually care about, and what am I using my business as a tool for, and what are the different opportunities or the different areas that I want to connect with that I feel my business will be able to make a difference. And then also so start from that, and start from being able to understand how that's influencing your decision around the culture that you want to be able to create within your organization. And then also being able to provide your employees with an opportunity to be able to make a difference. I mean, I just participated in this hackathon where there are over 3,000 people from around the world, and the majority of them were data scientists, and they care very deeply about the future of the world and where things are going. It's just being able to make those connections and build those bridges for people to allow them to find their pathway to impact, I think, is part of your role as a founder, and part of your role also as a human, is being able to understand how do I make those connections, and how do I start along that path. And one of the ways to do that is also to take a look at some of the other organizations that are already doing amazing work, that are much further along the way, and being able to find out what are some of the best practices that they've had in order to be able to get to where they are. You'd be surprised. Like I am shameless at calling up someone and saying, "Hey, tell me how you got to where you are. I'm super curious." And people are very generous with their time, and very generous with their knowledge. Did that answer your question?
He has already turned, his mic is off. I'm sure
Okay.
And we have a next question from Dima Hanin. Dima, please turn on your camera and microphone.
Hi, Daniel. Hi, Tiah. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Here. And we are missing you here in Australia.
Thank you. I'm missing Australia.
It was a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you.
And my question is about, it's not a question actually, it's a wish. Could you kindly share some examples, or an example of a real project or real story on a startup you've been working with, where you or maybe owners embed impact and the values in the business model, and how did you do that?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that. So a lot of the work that I do is recently has been actually around educational frameworks. So that means that the type of work that I do is that I don't get to work with organizations or businesses on a one-to-one basis for very long, but I mentor them, or I take them through specific courses. So in terms of like specific businesses and being able to provide an example of how I get them to think about it, a lot of it is through either the Pathway to Impact course, which is the one that I've created, or through being able to take a look at what is their strategic vision and where do they want to go, and what kind of different leadership styles do they, a lot of it is basically like business consulting, right? So being able to create a specific, starting off by creating what is the idea of what is one thing that they want to be able to do within their business, and then helping them implement that. So one of the organizations that I worked with in the past couple of years is an organization that will remain unnamed. But a lot of what they do is within, they work with women in being able to provide women with an opportunity to start their own business. And what they do is very place-based, which means that they work very much embedded in community, and they were looking for ways to be able to scale their social impact. And scaling social impact is something that is quite complicated, because if you are place-based and a lot of the impact that you do is in a community, then how do you actually scale that? So being able to figure out some of the different ways of how to think different about your business model. A lot of times I work with organizations or with startups around their business model. So what is the way that I'm actually going to be able to make money? And what is the difference between who is the person that is going to pay me for the services or the product that I do versus who is the actual, the user or the participant of that specific, the difference between who's using my product versus who's paying for my product or service. And I can give you some examples of organizations that are in different areas that I think are doing amazing impact. So one of the organizations that I continuously go back to is actually a restaurant here in Israel that I found out about last year. And I think it's a perfect example of a small business and how specific and how much they have grown in terms of their ability to be able to make a difference, and by focusing on making small steps. So it's a restaurant that's called Rutenberg, and they are based in the Jordan Valley here in Israel. And the founders are it's a chef and this other woman, and they started off by I'm just going to make food, and good food is something that I believe that is something that everybody should have. And then they slowly evolved into creating a complete closed loop system with everything that they do. So they started by asking really interesting questions around how might we, or how can we create a better community? So for example, they have 12 suppliers versus just 5. They have intimate relationships with each one of the suppliers. They understand where their food is coming from. They understand what they refuse to take anything that was that had chemicals in it. They do a lot of foraging for their food. They have this cool bladder that they put all of their waste into, and that creates gas that they use for electricity and to be able to use for their cooking. They start conversations with people in a sideways conversation, I call it. So when you go there, they provide you with appetizers on a broken plate, and that's a way for you to be able to ask, why is this on a broken plate? And they will say, well, because we believe that everything has a use and that there is no such thing as garbage. So we try and figure out ways to be able to utilize that. That's one example of a maybe not a tech company, but a company that is definitely very much focused on being able to make as much impact as possible. And they also say, they focus a lot on the fact that, well, we're here to be able to produce really awesome food. And if we don't produce awesome food, then everything else is really secondary to what we do. Another example is a tech company, and they were really interested in trying to figure out how to incorporate sustainable development goals into what they do. So we worked on being able to take apart their value chain and see and identify what are some of the things that they can do to start off with. And they identified that, for example, one of the things that they wanted to do is they wanted to change their servers, because their servers were being powered by coal, and they wanted them to be able to be powered by solar. So we did this whole thing around being able to find the specific suppliers. And then they started taking a look at what are some of the ways that they could better incorporate their employees and change the way that they do their corporate social responsibility within and engage their employees within it. And they just started doing different types of hackathons within the company itself. Does that answer? Is that a good enough broad spectrum of examples of?
Yeah, I think so. We have another question from Facebook Live, Rosso Padison. Roscoe, thanks for correcting me. Sorry about that. And let's take it. Let's have it as a final question, and we'll wrap it up. So Roscoe is asking, can you talk more about on how someone could perceive whole system in the B-centered design model of thinking?
How someone could better understand systems thinking?
So how someone could perceive whole system in the B-centered design model of thinking.
Oh, right. Okay. How can someone do systems thinking within the B-centered design? That's a really good question. So that goes back to the original slide, which had to do with what viewpoint are you taking? Are you a part of the system, or are you outside of the system? So when we think about systems thinking, one of the things to be able to think about is not linear, but rather circular. There's an amazing resource that I can send for Daniel later for him to share around what are some of the tools of a systems thinker. But when we think about human-centered design, usually what we think about the person who's going to be using the specific product. And I think that is limited because that does not think about what else is going to happen with that specific product. So when we think about designing it, what is it going to be designed of? You can look at it from a planet, people, profit perspective, in terms of, okay, what is it going to be made of? Is it going to be, am I taking responsibility for end of life of this specific product or service that I am, specifically product that I am designing? Where am I going to source the materials from? How else can, once it is being used, have I been able to look at all of the different myriad of perspectives around who else is using it, and is there some kind of unconscious bias that I am not aware of in terms of cultural language, the way that people use it, where they're going to be able to use it, what environment are they going to be using it in? And then also to think about, aside from the environmental aspect, also to think about from a cost perspective. There's a lot of really interesting business models that are happening around flat hierarchical structure with the product or the design itself, which is going to impact the way that you actually do the business. So there's I think that they're called gravity payments, and they were, he's very famous. The CEO is very famous for paying everybody a decent wage, which I think was 70 grand or something like that. And he's based in the US. And he decided that of a flat structure, that the gap between the person who works the floor to the person who is at the top will be a specific percentage, and everybody will make sure that everybody gets a certain amount of compensation for what they're doing. So if you incorporate that into the B-centered design, that also influences the way that you are sourcing your materials. It influences the way that you're costing things. It influences the environment in which you are operating in, the environment in which you're creating it, what you are creating it for, who you are creating it. Does that answer your question, Roscoe? I miss you, Roscoe, by the way.
Yeah, probably he will answer it on YouTube Live, but definitely was a very detailed, great answer. So let's wrap it up. I really enjoyed this talk, but what I wanted to say a few things. First of all, definitely this is a very unusual talk, because we usually talk about business. But sustainability, not many people can talk about sustainability, to be honest. Lots of people are using this word, but don't really put much understanding into it. And what we achieved today, I think we achieved the main goal of today, two main goals. First of all, I met you in Australia, and you are now in Israel. We had a few people who was asking questions. I met them before, and I know that, for example, Dmitry is in Australia, Nikita is in UK. There is Hawar in Pakistan, and so it's truly international. And I even mentioning the rest of the geographies we have right now. It was truly global talk, and I'm really excited about that. Second thing, which is super important for us, for our community, is to achieve with every webinar, is to have at least one startup moving forward with your recommendations. And I see here one comment from Nikita Dedik, is that he's saying, thanks, I will send it to my developers as a link to the recording of this webinar, among the first steps that I'll take as a founder. This is what I wanted to achieve, and I think that is a success of today's webinar. Thank you so much for that. Please close.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Just once again, just really thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's always I always think about what gives me joy, and this is one of the things that gives me joy, is being able to ramble about things that I care about. So thank you. I think in terms of I think that sometimes I forget about how much information I have absorbed. And if for people, wherever you are, start with where you are. And that is, as in, what is the next step that you can do? So if the next step is finding out more information, if the next step is being able to understand how can I incorporate my business, or how can I shift my business, understand that the future of what business is now is not going to be the future of what business is going to be, even in 1 or 2 years' time. Things are shifting very rapidly, and these type of things of being able to align your business to impact, and understanding that you can use your business as a tool for impact, is no longer something that is separate from, but is going to be imperative to the way that you operate. And taking a look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as using them as a very simple tool to be able to align some of the thinking and encourage conversations within the organizations that you work in, or that you have founded, is a great way to start. And thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. That was Tiah Goldstein. She talked about startup pathway to impact. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and share this talk with other entrepreneurs which want to change the world. Thank you, and see you soon, guys. Goodbye.